The doctor is in. No religion allowed here, just grace and truth. You've entered the No Religion Zone with Pastor Greg Lilly.
Hey, you've entered the NRZ, the No Religion Zone. Last week we dropped a bombshell to some of you. And I want to continue emphasizing the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Do you remember what I said last week? What the most important page in your Bible is? And it's that blank piece of paper, that page, not chapter, not verse, not book, but that one single page that divides the Old Testament from the New Testament. If you understand that page, I know it's blank, but there's a lot of revelation on that blank page. If you understand that, I'm telling you, everything starts clicking. And just like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, your hearts, when you read the scriptures, something will burn in you and move you because Christ is being unveiled, because that's what the whole thing is about. So let me explain something to you about the old and the new. I heard this years ago, and I thought it was really good, because everything really is about the Old versus the New Testament. Or let me start using the word covenant, because that's what testament is, covenant. So when Jesus is talking to the church in the book of Revelation, and he's talking to the church of Laodicea. Remember that church? I'm about to vomit you out of my mouth. What's that all about? Why? That's the church I don't want to be in. There's a lot of churches I don't want to be in, but that's one I don't want to be in. The church of Laodicea. He says, I would rather have you cold. You're not hot. I want you hot. But if you're not going to be hot, I would rather have you cold than lukewarm. And that puzzled me all my life as a youth, because that scripture we all got browbeated with into submission. Lukewarm Christians, you're straddling the fence. And their lukewarm understanding is you got one foot in sin, the compromised lifestyle, and you got the other foot in you're trying to be like Jesus. And you just got to make a decision. You just got to get off that fence. There's an old song. Get off that fence, preacher, because they were calling the preacher lukewarm. Is that what he was talking about? I think the key is when God says, I'd rather have you cold. Wow. If I'm lukewarm, wouldn't you think that's 50% good? At least. Think of a glass of water. It's not hot, but it's not cold. Listen, it's not cold. Give me some credit. I got from cold. I'm making my way to hot, and I just happened to stop at this resting place called lukewarm. I'm on my way. Just give me more time. No, I'm about ready to vomit you out of my mouth. Isn't lukewarm better than cold? I don't understand. And that is what's always puzzled me in my youth. I can't. But I don't know anything. I'm trusting my people that I'm under, and they know better than me, so I guess I'm just lukewarm, and I got to get off that fence. What's he saying? What's he mean? Does really God want you cold? Does he really want you cold versus hot and not lukewarm? What's he saying? When you understand the whole Bible is about Jesus, and what they're doing what they have been doing the last 200 years of the book of Revelation, called dispensationalism, which is only over almost, 100 to 200 years old, and nobody from Luther, Augustine, the Catholic Church, to the Greek Orthodox, all the way back to the Cappadocian Fathers and Athanasius and those guys, nobody understood that book like it's being preached today, because they weren't unveiling Jesus with it. The book of Revelation is a revelation of Jesus, not Antichrist, not Mark of the Beast, all that stuff we've made it about. That is Greek to the early church. They didn't know, what are you talking about? So if this whole Bible is about Jesus, and the old, Jesus bringing in the new covenant, and John being the end of the old covenant, we talked about that last week, then I have to start looking at these scriptures, because that's the debate. That's the division. When he says the end of the age, not the end of time, the end of the old covenant age. We're going into a new age. All these scriptures, when they were written in the time and context that they were written, is about ending one covenant and transitioning into the new covenant. And Paul's unveiling that to us. So when you look at the book of Revelation, and we're going to zero in on that church, Laodicea, what's he mean? Cold, hot, lukewarm. Cold represents the old covenant. Hot represents the new covenant. Lukewarm represents you, my friend, mixing both covenants. And God said, no. That kind of church, not the people individually, but the church corporately, the expression of that church. What did he say to the church at Ephesus? You've left your first love. When he says, I'm going to take you out if you don't return to your first love, he's not talking individually. It's the expression of the church at that time. God says, this is a work I'm not in. Now, I'm not cutting people off. I'm cutting this ministry off. It's a ministry of death. It's a ministry of condemnation. Go back to 2 Corinthians 3. And the church of Laodicea was a ministry of death. And he says, I'm going to take you out. I will not back that type of ministry up. It's not mine. And you're lukewarm. So what he's saying is, I would rather have you cold. All right. I can understand lukewarm being mixing covenants. I can understand that. And hot being the new covenant. Life. Spirit of life. Life-giving spirit. But why would you rather me be under the old covenant? At least if I'm mixing covenants, I'm on my way. No, it doesn't work like that. Because the letter of the law kills. See, here's the problem with mixing covenants. You'll always be grace-oriented and the law-oriented at the same time. And those don't mix. It will never work. And you will be self-righteous. Your lukewarmness is your self-righteousness. You do 50. I did my 50%. I did my part. And, God's going to do his part. You can always boast in your works. Because the old covenant is a covenant of works. So it's mixing covenants. But here's what. Why would he want me cold? He wants me under the old. Exactly. This is what Paul said. The law was given as a tutor. So what God's saying is, I would rather have you back under the tutor, because the tutor, the law, is going to condemn you, judge you, beat you to death, so you'll cry out for deliverance. You'll cry out for a Messiah. And thus, here we have Jesus. See, some of you, when you're mixing like that, you'll never see how you can never see when you're lukewarm. There's always a part of you that thinks that you can do it. Just give me something to do and I'll do it. And God says, I want that ended. So I'd rather have you go back to the old and get the revelation of the new than to stay lukewarm and mix these two things. And because you see, your righteousness from the old covenant is filthy rags. And if you mix these covenants, you're going to think your righteousness is what's rewarding you. When it's not your righteousness, it's his. And we're in him, and what's true of him is true of us. It's got nothing to do with us. We don't bring anything to the table. Now, I don't want to develop that anymore because I've just spent 9 minutes on this, and I've got so much more to tell you about. So you see and understand between the old, cold, new, hot, and when you mix these covenants, lukewarm, and God says that's not going to work. That's not going to work. I'd rather have you go back under the old and get beaten up with the law some more and come under the ministry of death and condemnation, so you'll cry out and make your way to Jesus, who is the new. I hope that helps you. I hope that makes sense. Now, that's my introduction, and get ready for where we're going to go. This was deliverance for me because, as you know, and I know I've said this a lot, I have been preaching the grace message since 1996. And in 1988-89, I got a hold of Malcolm Smith's teachings on the blood covenant. So I started preaching grace in 86. And then I was awakened to covenants. And then that made all the difference in the world. And so when I began to preach grace and the new covenant, you would have thought I was delivering people, and I'm bringing the best news possible to people that have been under the law, under that taskmaster. And you would have thought, just like Israel, you would have thought when Moses led them out of slavery, they would have rejoiced, but there was times they wanted to go back. And there's times Christians want to go back to the old because they don't understand the new, or they haven't completely got out of the old. See, they got Israel out of Egypt, but Egypt was never out of Israel. God delivered you from the old, but you still got the old in you. And you keep gravitating back to the law, to the law, to the law. And that's why God's like, it'll never work. You're mixing these covenants. So I was getting persecuted, guys, I'm telling you. I could never fit anywhere. I had to eventually leave my denomination over truth, over this grace message and the new covenant. I had to leave my denomination. Wait a minute here. Wait till you see where I go with this. The McDonald's ad there. Sorry about that. Now listen to this. All this persecution, all this division, all this marginalization. I'm thinking like Luther. There was a time that Martin Luther came to the place where he says, man, remember when he said, give me 24 hours. I'm not going to recant my writings yet. Just give me 24 hours. And he goes, and then that 24-hour period, he's like, Lord, what if I'm wrong? I'm going to lead all these people astray. But he couldn't. He knew what he knew. You can't unsee this once you see it. And he comes back and he says, here I stand. Here I stand. I will not recant. And I felt like that. I'm like, I don't fit anywhere. Everybody's mixing covenants. They're all under the old, or they're mixing the old and the new. I get a grace message one day, and I get beat up the next Sunday. And it's like, I knew that at least it's either, I'm like God, either get under the new or get under the old. Because this mixture, it's confusing everybody and me. And I knew better. So I had to make a break. But God led me to a series of commentaries years ago. I couldn't even tell you when I bought these. By Martin Lloyd-Jones. I don't agree with everything Martin Lloyd-Jones says, but there's a lot that he says that's really good. And this is his commentary on Romans chapter 6. Now, if you remember, in Romans chapter 5, he says, where sin abounds, grace superabounds. Grace abounds much more. And so people thought, hey, if that's the case, we're going to take this thing face value, Paul. If where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. So then we should be able to do whatever we want, sin, and let's just cast off restraint, and let's just party. So he comes back in chapter 6 and says, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Two major scriptures. And when I show you what Martin Lloyd-Jones says here in his commentary in the book of Romans, it's going to help you. Okay? So, understand the context. Paul says where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And people took off with it. And he comes back and says, wait a minute, shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? Now, there's a lot we can say there, but I want to bring one thing to you. Now, let me read this to you. And it is very, very good. There, he says, there is a sense in which this message of salvation by faith only is a very dangerous doctrine. Okay? Dangerous. I mean in the sense that it can be misunderstood. And the people that were under Paul, some misunderstood it. It exposes a man to this particular charge. What charge? People listening to it may say, there is a man who does not encourage us to live a good life. He seems to say that there is no value in our works. He says that all our righteousness is filthy rags. Therefore, what he is saying is that it does not matter what you do. Sin as much as you like. There is thus clearly a sense in which the message of justification by faith can be dangerous, and likewise with the message that salvation is entirely of grace. I say, therefore, that if our preaching, listen to this, talking to ministers, talking to all of us, he says, I say, therefore, that if our preaching does not expose us to that charge and to this misunderstanding, it is because we are not really preaching the gospel. Wow. So, you know me, and maybe you don't, but you will after you keep watching me. I can be facetious. And I read that, and I'm like, okay, so if you didn't get what I read, let me explain what he's saying. He's saying, Paul came under this charge. We could just do whatever we want to do. That's exactly the response we want. I can do whatever I want to do. If I get that accusation called greasy grace, sloppy agape, then I have preached the gospel right. Because that's the charge that Paul got. He says, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And they said, well, Paul, then we can just do whatever we want then, huh? This guy's just, and I just read it to you. And it's like, yeah, except he'll come on in chapter 6 and say, except for one thing, you died. Sorry, you can't live like that. You died. And then he'll unveil to us in chapter 6 that we died to sin. Chapter 7, we died to the law. Chapter 8, we're alive to the Holy Spirit. It's a glorious gospel. And if you're not if you don't have this accusation railed against you, you have never preached the gospel. Well, I get it. I was getting persecuted like crazy. I had to leave a denomination. The Assemblies of God, I had to walk away because of the grace message. Now, let me tell you this. So I can be a little colorful at times. And I said to myself, let's look at this is years ago. I don't know when I read this, probably late 90s. I don't know, early 2000. But I said, let's look at the preachers on TBN. Can I make this charge against them? And I listed them. Joyce Meyer, John Hagee, Rod Parsley. Now I'm naming the ones that were popular back then. I don't know. I don't watch Christian television like that anymore. And I'm not marginalizing these people. I'm telling you something. I mean, if you come here, this is the no religion zone. There is no religion allowed here. We're not playing games. It's grace and truth. And if you can't handle truth, I'm sorry, but this is my progression, my evolution of the grace message. I said, now honestly, Paul preached the gospel. Paul preached the gospel, and this is the accusation railed against him. He's preaching sloppy agape and greasy grace. He can say we can do whatever we want to do. And Martin Lloyd-Jones says exactly, if you've got that charge railed against you, you're preaching the gospel. But we'll fix it, because that's not what we're saying. Because grace teaches us to live a godly life. And again, Romans 6, 7, 8 fixes that. Romans 6, 7, 8 fixes the accusation of Romans 5. Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. But you cannot water the gospel down because you're afraid of being charged against this greasy grace, hyper grace labeling. All right? So I went down and I said, can this guy be charged against hyper grace? No. Can this woman be charged with the accusation of hyper grace? No. And I went down the list of all the people that I knew were on TBN that I knew of, that I'd listened to. And I couldn't find one that I could rail that accusation against, that they were preaching greasy grace, hyper grace, sloppy agape, that they were taking the grace message too far. No one. No one. On TV. On TV. And I said, wow. That's it. And I at that point said, okay, Lord, I get it. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get this accusation railed against me every time I preach the message from somebody or someone. Have you gotten hate mail? If you're a pastor or a minister, have you gotten hate mail? Have you been deleted on Facebook? That's what Grace Awakening Network is all about. That's what this network, GAN, is all about, is you're not going to find mixture. You're not going to find people that are afraid to preach the gospel. And probably everybody you've listened to, you thought, wow, they're saying I can do whatever. That's because they're preaching the gospel right. However, they're going to go on to teach you that's not a good way of seeing it. But you got to have that accusation, because you got to understand, people don't know. These people, and he's speaking to Romans. Romans is Paul's great manifesto to the church. They didn't understand it, so it's a knee-jerk reaction to think that. But man, I'm telling you, that's the litmus test, folks. How do I know if I'm preaching the gospel right? How do I know? How do I know if I'm doing this thing right? I mean, there's so much persecution. There's so much controversy. I've been alienated. I've been this, that, and the other. How do I know? Because I'm going to get that. Because I will be accused of it, as you will. And that ought to set you free. That ought to set you free. So I told you in 1986, I had to leave my church. Okay? In 1988, I left my denomination because of these accusations. In 1998, when I started the church I'm presently pastoring now, been in the same church since 1998, I got on the radio in 1998, and I wanted to take, because TV is too expensive back then, still is, except thank God for the internet and apps. We can do a lot now on TV. But watch this. In 1998, I went to a rock and roll radio station, a rock station in our area. I got to hurry up. I only got about 7 minutes. And I said, hey, I want to do a program. Now, this is not a Christian radio station. I didn't want to be on a Christian radio station. So I said, here's what I want to do. I want to teach the Bible and play rock and roll music. The guy said, what? I said, I want to teach the Bible and play rock and roll music. He's like, wow, I can't see why we can't do that. Guess what? The only time I could get it done, be on air, is on a Sunday. And I didn't want a Sunday. I said, can you do a Saturday? A Friday? Saturday night? Friday? Give me. Nope. It had, because it was religious, it had to be bumped in the middle of all these religious programs that was airing on Sunday morning. I said, all right, yeah, whatever. Okay, we'll go for it. You know, I'd rather reach those who have never heard than try to reach those who have. But it will also work because, again, how many people are in religion? So we signed the contract. There's a little stipulation in this contract. They can cancel it at any time, but I can't. For any reason. If they want to cancel it, they'll cancel it. And he said, you know, and I was like, well, that's not fair. I said, but okay. He said, well, the reason why, he said, because we're talking about ending the religious programs on Sunday down the road. Not now, down the road. And, you know, so I was like, okay. So I signed the contract. Paid my money. Paid the money. It was, I didn't have a lot of money, but I financed this thing myself. And so we played Sunday morning. And I make this statement, one of the controversial statements, one of many that I make. I said, I want sinners in my church. I said, yeah, you heard me right. I want sinners in my church. Now, I'm using the term sinners because that's the mentality that they know themselves as. So I said, this is 1998, I said, I want prostitutes in my church. I want lesbians in my church. I want homosexuals in my church. I want them on the front line. On the front row. And I was I was setting people free. I was giving them the grace message. And I remember, man, I'm running out of time again, 3 minutes. I remember saying that woman caught in the act of adultery, she was committing adultery, but she could have been a lesbian. Let's make her a lesbian. Well, Jesus had done the same thing. And man, I hit him hard. That first program, I came out swinging. I get a phone call Monday morning canceling me. A non-religious radio station that plays rock music. Listen to me. That plays rock music. It tells you to have sex. It tells you to take drugs. The music that comes out of that. I mean, all kinds of crazy lyrics in this rock music. And I'm going to get canceled because of my content? I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I said, dude, what's up with that? He said, well, like I told you, we're not going to do the religious programming anymore. I'm like, that quick? I said, do I get my money back? No, because the contract says we can cancel at any time. I got to air one show, paid all that money to air one show. So I thought, there's something sneaky going on. Something suspicious going on here. So I had a friend call up the following Monday, say, hey, where's that Greg Lilly guy that was on? You know what they said to her? Oh, that guy's a revolutionary. She said, what? Oh, he's off the wall, man. We got all kinds of phone calls from pastors in the area that it was the pastors that called him up, that station up, and said they were going to cancel their programs if they wouldn't get me off. I'm a revolutionary. Are you kidding me? And Jesus had prostitutes sitting at his feet. Jesus had a prostitute washing his feet. I thought, you know what, maybe one day I ought to find a prostitute in my town and say, hey, come, I'll give you $100, not for what you think, but I'll give you $100 to come to my church service. And all I ask you to do is sit at my feet and just massage my feet while I preach a message. And everybody's going to know what you do for a living. How do you think that'd go well with my church or people watching on TV? He brought a prostitute in his church and she's massaging his feet. Yeah, well, are we really wanting to preach the gospel? Do we even really know what the gospel is? Boy, if you preach the gospel, you will be persecuted. You will be persecuted like you've never, if you're preaching it right. Now, you can preach a watered-down gospel, a mixture gospel, and the church, the religious church, will love you and applaud you and even tithe to you. They'll even tithe to you. But are you willing to preach the gospel right, get the accusations railed against you that you are preaching a false gospel and no one's going to give to it? Will you still preach that gospel? I'll see you next week on the NRZ, the No Religion Zone.
Thank you for tuning into the NRZ. To contact us, go to our website at greglilly.com. And if God lays on your heart to give, according to Galatians 6:6, you can access the different ways you can give. That's greglilly.com.